In recent years, there has been a lot of discussion around the importance of the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the part of your cell commonly referred to as the powerhouse of your cell. So as the name suggests, it produces a lot of energy. It is also very important for cellular health, detoxification, and is very big in the anti-aging world. The decline of mitochondrial function can be linked to almost any single condition, but there is a lot of literature to support its link to things like heart disease, cancer, and neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, and Huntington's. So needless to say, this is a very important part of your cell. And this isn't the first time I've discussed mitochondrial health. So in my previous episode called Tired, Support Your Mitochondria for More Energy, there I focus more on micronutrients and some of the habits that are very helpful for your mitochondria. Today I'm going to switch gears though and talk more about fats. So how you can choose the right dietary and supplement fats to help support a healthy mitochondria. And so if you're a health nerd like me, I think you're really going to enjoy today's episode. But first, before we jump into everything, I should introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Robin Lewis. I'm a naturopathic physician practicing in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And let's get into it. First though, please like and subscribe to this channel if you feel you get value out of these videos so I can also keep everything coming. With that in mind though, let's jump into everything. So I want to talk about first why we should care about fats for the mitochondria. Where is this implicated? So really a large reason why I wanted to do this video is because fats are very important for supporting your mitochondrial membranes. So the mitochondria has actually two cell membranes, an inner and an outer. So you can kind of think of it like an encased balloon. The thing that's encasing all of the fluid inside your mitochondria are those membranes, and those membranes are mostly fat. They form into what we call a lipid bilayer, which essentially means there's fatty components, meaning fat soluble things that break down well in fat, that are fat. They face each other, and then the outer parts of the membrane have a water-soluble component, meaning they interact well with water because everything surrounding your mitochondria and contained within your mitochondria is water-based. So those components face the inner and the outer parts of the cell, whereas the layer itself is mostly made up of fat. I'll throw up a diagram so this makes some sort of sense so you can kind of visually understand what I mean, but the fat that makes up those membranes will also dictate how healthy that mitochondria is. There's actually huge implications, especially when it comes to the mitochondria, for a lot of reasons, but one key reason is that we have an electron transport chain inside the mitochondria that is very crucial for energy production. So a lot of the components of the electron transport chain are embedded inside the mitochondria itself, inside the mitochondrial membrane, And so, of course, if this membrane is functioning well and optimized, the mitochondria is better able to produce energy, to produce that ATP that is going to go around and fuel your body, energize your body, help facilitate repair, and all the wonderful things that we need energy for. Your mitochondrial membrane is very important to that, and the fats that make up that membrane will dictate how the membrane functions. So you can have bad fats that incorporate into the membrane because all you're eating is bad fats, for example. So then you have an unhealthy membrane and therefore an unhealthy mitochondria. Conversely, you can have healthy fats that support a very well functioning, healthy, happy mitochondria, and then it's better able to complete its task. It's better able to support your cells and support your whole body. So I'm going to help walk you through how to choose the right kind of fats. How do you find these things in nature, in food, and how do you make sure that they make it into the body healthy, intact, and provide support for your mitochondria? But first, let me just drive home why eating right for your mitochondria is so important. So as I alluded to before, your mitochondria produces a lot of energy. It produces about 95% of your body's ATP. and ATP is the main energy currency. So this is why something like your mitochondria is so important for brain health and for cardiac heart health. It's because those particular tissues, for example, have a lot of mitochondria. They're also very energy demanding organs. The most obvious example of that is your heart. Your heart beats constantly to pump blood throughout the body. It needs a lot of energy to do that, which is why it's one of the most dense in mitochondria. It can't stop moving, otherwise you stop living. So it is very demanding, and so is your brain, because that's kind of the computer center, the control center for the rest of your body, and it also consumes a really large amount of energy relative to other parts. If we look at cellular cleanup, so mitochondrial health is very important for triggering something called apoptosis, aka cell death. On its face, that might not sound very important, but it is important because you need to be able to get rid of cells that are dysfunctional and damaged. If you don't get rid of cells that are beat up, not working well, maybe they have mutations because they've been damaged through toxins, UV light, or whatever else, a lot of things damage our cells. And those cells need to be recycled, broken down, and killed if they don't function very well. And where this really goes wrong is cancer. Cancer is a very good example of your body not detecting a dysfunctional cell, not getting rid of that dysfunctional cell, and now that dysfunctional cell turns into a cancer cell, and then that cancer grows and grows and grows. So if you don't have proper cellular cleanup, it does in extreme cases lead to cancer, and in lesser cases leads to a lot of dysfunction and just poorly functioning cells, right? It's also incredibly important for the control of things like calcium and heme that carries around iron throughout your body. So it can be a place where we tightly regulate certain compounds inside the body. And it's also very important for heat regulation and metabolism, which has a lot of implications with weight and energy and things like that. So hopefully I've convinced you that your mitochondria is very important. This will set the stage for why we're gonna really focus on fats to support that mitochondrial health. And so, as I mentioned before, most of that membrane is made up of phospholipids. Those phospholipids have the water-soluble end, they call it a polar end, and then the fatty chains. So what you eat will get incorporated into those fatty chains. So if you eat certain fats, those phospholipid chains can change. Let's just put it in really simple terms. If you have bad fatty acids, you have bad phospholipids, which means you have a bad mitochondrial membrane, which means you have an unhealthy mitochondria, which means you have unhealthy cells and an unhealthy body. So there you go, episode done. So let's dive into what the majority of those phospholipids have for fatty acid chains. So this could be things like omega-3s and omega-6s, which are terms you're likely used to hearing, but they're specific types. And so if we talk about the types that make up about 60 to 80% of that membrane, they're things such as the follows. There's palmitidic acid, stearic acid, oleic acid, linoleic acid, and arachidonic acid. So first, I'm going to talk to you about palmitidic and stearic, because those are saturated fats. So how many of you have been told saturated fats are bad? Don't eat saturated fats. We'd all be better off if we had zero saturated fat inside our body. Not true. If you eat healthy saturated fats, such as the ones I just mentioned, they can be part of a very healthy mitochondrial membrane. The main sources of these saturated fats would be places like beef, dairy, and coconut oil. As long as you're not overdoing them, and as long as you're sourcing them responsibly, they are very much a part of a healthy cell membrane. And those are some of the places you can find those particular saturated fats. So let's move on to oleic acid. Oleic acid is commonly referred to as the main healthy fatty acid found in olive oil. This is why so many people talk about the health benefits of olive oil. It's usually because of the oleic acid found within the olive oil. But you can also find oleic acid in other seeds and other nuts. You can find it in some animal products, but the point is you want a diet with a lot of oleic acid in there as well, because that's also a part of a healthy cell membrane and a healthy mitochondrial cell membrane. But again, just make sure you're sourcing it properly, and especially in the context of things like cooking oils. So example, olive oil, you want to make sure that you're also storing these things properly. So if you have too much exposure to heat and light, the fats inside that olive oil can actually go rancid. So now you're consuming a bunch of oleic acid that's chemically altered, not the same, and no longer good for your cell membranes. It'll destabilize the fat, making it behave different inside those membranes. So sometimes you also are consuming the right things, but the manufacturing process or the storage process has ruined those fats and therefore made them less healthy. So that's also something to consider when you talk about consuming all these different sort of fats. Just know that you can make those fats unhealthy if you overheat them, if you overprocess them, and that's a big reason why they don't recommend overprocessed foods. Linoleic acid, another huge player in the mitochondrial membrane, is found primarily in nuts and seeds. And so this brings up the interesting conversation of seed oils, right? There's a lot of conversation around seed oils being bad. Well, that is simply not true if you look at the composition of your mitochondrial membrane. But there is a big but there. A lot of these linoleic sources, the fat in there, especially in the oil version, not the whole nut, the whole seed, but if you've derived the oil and it's sitting on the shelf, it can be more vulnerable than something like a saturated fat to that heat and to that oxidative process that is heat and light breaking down those fats. It's called oxidized fats once you've had that process occur, and the oxidized fats are not what you want. The seed oils are more susceptible to that oxidative process. They're more vulnerable, they're a little less stable, so they have to be handled more carefully, which isn't often happening in the food processing industry. And so this is really like a more nuanced topic than just all seed oils are bad. If you process them improperly, they are bad. If you don't do that, they are actually very good, very important for your mitochondrial membrane to function properly. And then the last fat is arachidonic acid. And this is mostly coming from animal sources like beef, poultry, eggs, and things like that. Which also means that maybe some of these animal products are also good to have inside the diet. So ultimately, my standpoint when it comes to diet is a lot of things in moderation. I don't really truly believe that everyone should be plant-based. That might be a diet that works for some of you, but if you look at the fatty acid profiles of a plant-based diet, you're missing some key players. And same thing for a carnivore diet, right? Those are two extreme examples. Whereas like, yeah, I'm sure you could make either work and there's pros and cons to either, but ideally you're eating a well-rounded diet that's giving you a little bit of all of these different types of fats. You're not over-processing the crap out of them. You're not frying the crap out of them. And therefore, you're getting all of these fats that your mitochondrial membrane needs to thrive. And so that's kind of my perspective, is I don't like to omit entire categories of food, but just be aware of the sourcing of that food and the processing of that food. And the last specific fat that I want to mention here are the omega-3s. So they don't actually make up a large percentage of your mitochondrial membrane. It's estimated around 10% should be omega-3, specifically DHA. So we have two main active omega-3s that you find in things like fish oil, for example. That's EPA and DHA. It's actually DHA that is the main player in mitochondrial membrane. So that's very specific, interesting. But again, it's only about 10% of that membrane. So that's where this recommendation to have things like seafood around 4 times a week. You do actually need a lot more omega-6s, so that would be things like the linoleic acid and the arachidonic acid. You need at least 3 times more of those than you do of your omega-3s. So for a lot of people, that just means occasionally having seafood. If you're plant-based, you can get these omegas from algae oil. And for a lot of people, you don't actually need as much as you'd think. The omega-3s can be an argument for a lot of different conditions, but if we're talking about someone who's healthy and just trying to eat optimally, usually you can get away with just eating these things about 4 times a week. Sometimes there's exceptions where you need more than usual amounts of omegas and so on. But I'm just talking about if you were getting everything well-rounded through the diet, you do need a bit of omega-3, but far more of the other fats. And again, this is why all of these things are so nuanced. In general, there is a requirement for fat that's about 20 to 35% of your diet. So if I talk about diets that I really, really don't like, a low-fat diet is on there. You really, truly need fat. It's essential. Low-fat diets are a completely demystified thing. There's no justification for a low-fat diet anymore. If you're getting between 20 to 35% of your diet, having that be good, high-quality sources of fat, I'm a happy camper. If you choose bad fats, sure, maybe you benefit from a low-fat diet because you're choosing crappy fats. But if you eat the right types of fat, it's very important for optimizing your mitochondria and optimizing your overall health, because fat, if taken appropriately, is extremely good for you. Again, just make sure you're sourcing the right ones. Okay, so those are the dietary fatty chains. But I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the phospholipids directly, because some of these things you can supplement in its whole form. So it's not just about the fatty chains, you can take the whole phospholipid. So one phospholipid that's very unique to the mitochondria is something called cardiolipin. Well, 3 phospholipids are very important for the mitochondria: phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylethanolamine, and cardiolipin. But cardiolipin is an interesting one because it's very unique to the mitochondria. So if you look at studies and how to support that particular phospholipid, which is mainly found in your mitochondria, it talks about eating a diet rich in polyunsaturated fats like linoleic acid and like DHA. It also talks about consuming things like fat-soluble vitamins. So that's things like vitamin E and CoQ10. These will protect those fats from oxidation, from all the toxins that we're exposed to, the heating process, and all of these other things that can damage fats. Well, if you have a diet rich in these antioxidants, like vitamin C, CoQ10, then they will also protect those fats from damage. So that's also an important thing to consider. But the one main phospholipid that you can supplement directly is something called phosphatidylcholine. And this is a very popular supplement in people who have chronic illness, because a lot of the times you need more than usual amounts of these fats to recover all of the damage that has happened throughout the years on your mitochondria. So there's sometimes an argument for taking higher than usual amounts of certain compounds if you know that your mitochondria is already really damaged, already really dysfunctional, such as in the case of chronic infections like Lyme disease. A lot of these chronic illnesses are associated with mitochondrial decline. And so something like phosphatidylcholine, which is approximately supposed to make up about 50% of that membrane, is very, very important for recovering the health of those membranes. You can find it naturally in things like organ meats, egg yolks, and other types of meat. But I'm talking about supplementing or IV forms of phosphatidylcholine where you're getting supraphysiological amounts of it, meaning more than dietary amounts, abnormally high amounts. There is an argument to be said for taking these supplements or doing it in an IV form, which is the 2 main methods of administration. So a lot of clinicians and experts might recommend phosphatidylcholine to the general population, but there are some places where there's a lot of research to support the use of this supplement. One of the things that is interesting is that, yes, phosphatidylcholine in general makes up a large part of your mitochondrial membrane, but it is also 70% of your intestinal mucosa layer. So it has a particularly strong impact on that mucus layer inside your digestive tract. So this is really going to be important for protecting the lining of your digestive tract. So against the things that we eat, the stomach acid, we're exposed to a lot of things orally, and all of that has to make its way through our digestive tract, and that mucus layer is there to protect it. So you could assume that if you don't feed that mucus layer, if you don't give it the things it needs to form a really strong mucus layer, then you might be more vulnerable to damage of the lining. They've shown that a condition called ulcerative colitis seems to have really good outcomes supplementing with phosphatidylcholine. Ulcerative colitis is when you get a lot of damage to the lining of your colon. So the lining of the colon gets ulcers. So there's raw, damaged components of that colon. So that's why you get a lot of abdominal pain, blood in the stool, mucus in the stool, and a lot of really unpleasant diarrhea and things like that. It's because there's a lot of damage and destruction inside the colon. Phosphatidylcholine has been shown to slow disease progression, improve remission, so get those people healed back up so the ulcers aren't formed anymore or they're healing back down. One small study that I looked at gave people with ulcerative colitis about 6 grams of phosphatidylcholine a day for 3 full months. And what they found is there was a significant reduction in disease activity. So I'm just going to read this off quickly for you. So the disease went into clinical remission, meaning the disease has become inactive. It's not damaging anymore. This clinical remission happened in about 16 patients. So that's 53% of the patients who took the phosphatidylcholine, compared to 3 who took the placebo, which was about 10%. So 53% of those people improved with the phosphatidylcholine supplementation, and only 10% of the placebo group improved. So that is a really statistically significant improvement. Yes, it's a small study, but that's usually what we're working with when it comes to all of these different types of nutritional studies. They're not usually using hundreds of thousands of people. So still very interesting and does make a lot of sense if you understand the biochemistry and the biology of the colon. There's also studies that show phosphatidylcholine supplements or IVs can be helpful for liver inflammation, even late stages like liver cirrhosis. It's also been shown to improve cholesterol profiles, so improve things like HDL, lower total cholesterol. And as I've alluded to earlier, it's just very important for mitochondrial health in general. And so this is really a very popular supplement in conditions where there's a lot of chronicity, so chronic infections, you've accumulated a lot of damage over a long period of time. It's also very helpful for things like chronic fatigue, where you know the cells aren't working well, that's why you're excessively tired all the time. And this is where you're taking more than the diet can provide. So you're high dosing things like phosphatidylcholine to try and replace some of those phospholipids inside the mitochondrial membranes to get these mitochondria to start functioning properly again after years of dysfunction. Diet alone isn't always sufficient. If you're working more in the realm of prevention, how do I optimize my body? I'm feeling really good, but I want to live forever sort of people. That's where you can just focus on a lot of the things in the diet. Maybe some of you want to play around with a phosphatidylcholine supplement or an omega-3 supplement if you're not getting enough through the diet sort of thing. But for a lot of people, if you just eat the right fats, the right manufactured fats, then you can have a healthy mitochondrial membrane. But if you already are quite ill, quite unwell, exhausted, chronically dealing with a lot of health issues, then you'll likely have to take more than your diet can provide. So that's where a phosphatidylcholine supplement might be helpful, or some of those nutrients, again, that I mentioned in my previous episode on the mitochondria. So I hope that this information today was helpful. If you guys have any questions, please comment them below. If you have any experiences with some of these supplements, please comment those below. And thanks again for listening to today's episode.